Before money, life was a mess. It wasn't just inconvenient, the whole system was constantly on the verge of collapse. Picture this: you're the best arrow maker in your village. Your arrows fly truer than anyone else's. Your work is legendary. But legendary craftsmanship doesn't keep you warm in the winter. You need a coat, a good one. So you walk over to the coat maker's hut holding a bundle of your finest arrows. You present them, feeling pretty proud. The coat maker admires your work, she really does, but she shakes her head. She doesn't need arrows. Her husband's the hunter, and he's all set. What she needs is fish for dinner. So, now what? You have something she wants, but not something she needs, and your day just got a lot more complicated. Now you have to find a fisherman. You track one down by the river, and thankfully, he's had a good day. But he just looks at your arrows and shrugs. He only fishes, he doesn't hunt. What he needs is a new net. This is the absurdly inefficient world of barter. A world where every single transaction is a puzzle, a wild goose chase across the village, all while you're racing against the clock before the fisherman's catch starts to smell. This wasn't a rare problem. This was daily life, and it was holding humanity back in ways we can barely even imagine. The entire system relied on a ridiculous coincidence. This problem has a name: the double coincidence of wants. It's a fancy term for a simple, crippling idea. For any trade to happen, you had to find someone who not only had the exact thing you wanted, but who also wanted the exact thing had at the exact same time. Think about how unlikely that is. It's like trying to find your one true soulmate every single time you need to buy a loaf of bread. The odds are just not in your favor. And the headaches didn't stop there. Let's say you're an apple farmer. You want milk. Miraculously, you find a dairy farmer who wants apples. Awesome. But how many apples is a gallon of milk worth? 10? 20? What if your apples are kind of small this season? What if his milk is extra rich? In a barter economy, there's no standard measure of value. Every item has a different price in terms of every other item. A chicken might be worth 10 pounds of apples, but only 3 pounds of salt, or a fifth of a shoe. The mental math to run an economy like this is just staggering. Then there's the problem of storage. Back to our fishermen, even if you, the arrow maker, found a net maker who wanted fish, you'd have to get paid in fish. Fish rot. You can't exactly save up a pile of rotting fish to buy a house. Wealth in a barter system disappears. It spoils, it dies, it rusts. You couldn't store value for the future, which meant you couldn't plan, you couldn't invest, and you couldn't build. Society was stuck in the present tense, unable to grow. This wasn't just an economic headache, it was a brake on civilization itself. Progress was being suffocated by the simple, maddening inability to trade. Humanity desperately needed a breakthrough. It needed an idea. The solution didn't come from some grand plan. It grew organically, out of pure frustration. People started to notice that some goods were just easier to trade than others. They were more durable, easier to carry, and more people wanted them. So instead of trading your specific skill or perishable good directly, you'd trade it for one of these more convenient, universally accepted items first. This was the birth of commodity money. One of the earliest examples comes from ancient Mesopotamia. They built a massive, complex economy on it. Around 2150 BC, they established the shekel, a unit of weight, as their currency. A shekel was equal to a specific weight of barley, which acted as a form of money. Suddenly, the whole game changed. The boat builder didn't have to find a baker who desperately needed a boat. He could sell his boat to anyone for a pile of barley. Then he could take that barley, which lasts a whole lot longer than fish, and buy whatever he wanted. The barley became a medium of exchange, a middleman that broke the curse of the double coincidence of wants. This idea popped up all over the world. In parts of Africa, it was salt. Roman soldiers were famously paid some of their wages in salt, which is where we get the word salary. In other places, it was cattle. Cattle were valuable and mobile, but these first attempts at money were still pretty flawed. Imagine trying to buy a loaf of bread with a cow. It's not exactly divisible. You can't just hack off a leg and expect the rest of the cow to hold its value. Salt was more divisible, but it could dissolve in the rain. Not great. Cowrie shells were used across Asia and Africa. They were durable and portable, but if someone got lucky and found a new beach covered in them, they could instantly create a wave of inflation, wiping out the value of everyone else's savings. Each of these solved one problem, but created new ones. They were a brilliant first step, but they weren't the final answer. The world needed something better, something more durable, more divisible, more portable, and harder to fake. The world needed metal. The jump to metal was a total game changer. Gold, silver, and copper had everything commodity money lacked. They were incredibly durable, lasting for centuries. They were easy to divide without losing value. A small pouch of gold was worth more than a cart full of barley. And, crucially, they were rare. You couldn't just stumble upon a beach full of gold. Its supply was naturally limited, which gave it a stable value. For a long time, people just traded with raw lumps of metal. But this still had a big problem. Every time you made a trade, you had to pull out scales, weigh the metal, and check its purity. It was better than bartering fish, sure, but it was slow and required a ton of trust. How did you know the other guy's scales weren't rigged? How could you be sure that gold lump wasn't just lead with a fancy coating? The fix for this final problem came from a kingdom in modern-day Turkey called Lydia. Around the 7th century BC, the Lydians did something revolutionary. They took lumps of electrum, a natural mix of gold and silver, standardized the weight, and stamped them with an official seal, usually a lion's head. This was the Lydian stater, the world's first official coin. That stamp wasn't just for decoration. It was a promise. It was a guarantee from the king of Lydia that this little disc of metal was a specific weight and purity. You didn't need your scales anymore. You could just trust the coin. The stamp shifted the burden of trust from two random people to a central authority. This simple act ignited a global revolution. All modern coins are descendants of this Lydian invention. The idea spread like crazy. By the 5th century BC, coins stamped with gods and emperors were jingling in pockets across the Greek, Persian, Macedonian, and Roman empires. This standardization supercharged trade, allowing for the creation of vast, interconnected economies. The Roman Empire, with its standard denarius coin, could pay soldiers and officials from Britain to Egypt, creating a cohesive economic zone that fueled its entire expansion. Money was no longer just a tool for exchange, it was a tool for building empires. But as trade got bigger, even bags of gold and silver started to feel a bit heavy. A new, even more abstract idea was just around the corner. Imagine you're a merchant in 7th century China during the Tang Dynasty. You just sold a massive shipment of silk for thousands of heavy, clunky copper coins. Now you have to lug all that metal across the country, hoping you don't get robbed. It was dangerous and expensive. Merchants, tired of the risk, found a brilliant workaround. They started leaving their heavy coins with a trusted third party for safekeeping. In return, they got a paper note, a receipt, saying how much they had on deposit. These were called flying cash. And what happened next was the real revolution. Instead of going back to cash in the receipt to make a purchase, merchants realized they could just trade the paper receipts directly. The paper was just as good as the metal because everyone knew it'd be exchanged for the real thing. This was the birth of paper money, starting as private IOUs. By the 11th century, during the Song dynasty, the Chinese government saw the power of this system and issued the world's first official government-backed paper currency, the jiaozi. For the first time, the value of money was completely detached from the physical stuff in your hand. Its value was in the promise it represented. But this new tech came with a powerful temptation. For a ruler, creating wealth was no longer about mining more gold. You could just fire up the printing press. And for a while, it worked. But as governments printed more and more notes to pay their bills, the amount of paper money quickly outstripped the metal reserves backing it. People realized the promise was being broken. As confidence vanished, so did the money's value. The experiment collapsed, and by 1455, paper money had been abandoned in China for several hundred years. The idea, though, was too good to die. It reappeared in Europe centuries later. This time, London goldsmiths were the pioneers. People would deposit their gold coins with a goldsmith for safekeeping and get a paper receipt. Soon, people were trading these receipts, which became known as banknotes, just like they were coins. The goldsmiths, who were basically becoming the first bankers, noticed something clever. Only a small fraction of their customers ever came in to get their actual gold at the same time. This gave them an idea. They could issue banknotes, more promises, than the gold they actually had in their vaults. They could lend these extra notes out and charge interest, effectively creating money from thin air. This was the beginning of what we now call fractional reserve banking. This practice spread. In 19th century America, things were a chaotic free-for-all. There were over 5,000 different kinds of banknotes being issued by thousands of different banks, each with its own design and level of trustworthiness. Some were solid. Others were backed by little more than a prayer. It was clear that for paper money to really work, it needed stability, and that required the backing of a nation. To fix the chaos and build real trust in paper money, governments made a critical decision. They would officially tie their currency to gold. While the U.S. had a bimetallic standard using gold and silver as early as 1792, the international gold standard really began to take shape when England formally adopted it in the years following the Napoleonic Wars, around 1821. This system created clear rules. A government could only issue banknotes corresponding to the amount of gold it held in its vaults. This was a powerful promise. Your paper dollar or pound wasn't just paper. It was a claim check for a specific amount of real, tangible gold. This created huge stability and kept governments from printing money recklessly, which kept inflation under control. For much of the 19th and early 20th centuries, this system anchored the global economy. But the gold standard was also incredibly rigid. It made it hard for governments to respond to a crisis. During a recession, you couldn't just increase the money supply to stimulate the economy unless you physically got more gold, which was often impossible. This inflexibility became a massive problem during the Great Depression of the 1930s. One by one, countries started cutting the cord between their currency and gold to give them more flexibility to fight the economic collapse. The final nail in the coffin came in 1971. U.S. President Richard Nixon announced that the United States would no longer convert dollars to gold at a fixed rate. The gold standard was dead. And with that, humanity took its most abstract leap yet. We entered the age of fiat money. The word fiat comes from Latin, meaning "let it be done." Fiat money is currency that a government declares to be legal tender, but it's not backed by any physical commodity. The dollar bill in your wallet has value for one reason and one reason only, because we all agree it does. Its value comes from trust. Not trust in a pile of gold, but trust in the stability of the government and the strength of the economy it manages. This is the heck of what money is today. It's a social construct. It's a shared belief. The paper is worthless. The digital numbers on a screen are just data. But it works because it nails the three essential functions of money. It's a medium of exchange, finally solving the barter problem. It's a unit of account, giving us a yardstick to measure the value of everything from a spaceship to a pack of gum. And it's a store of value, letting us save our purchasing power for later. Money isn't a thing, it's a system. It's purchasing power captured in a token that represents a claim on everything we might want to buy. And this system, built entirely on trust, was about to face its most radical challenge yet, one born from the digital world. For decades, the story of money was the story of governments and central banks. But then the internet happened. Our money was already becoming more and more digital, just numbers shifting between servers. It was almost inevitable that someone would ask the next logical question. If money is just information, do we still need the banks and the governments? In 2009, right after a global financial crisis that shattered trust in the old system, an answer appeared. A mysterious person or group named Satoshi Nakamoto released a white paper for a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. It was called Bitcoin. The idea was to create a secure way to send money directly from one person to another with no middleman. No bank, no government. To do this, Nakamoto invented a technology called the blockchain. Think of the blockchain as a public digital receipt book that's shared and verified by everyone on the network. Instead of one bank keeping the ledger, thousands of computers all over the world do it together. This decentralization makes it incredibly secure and basically impossible to cheat. Bitcoin wasn't just a new currency, it was a new philosophy. It was money controlled by code, math, and its community. And the financial world hasn't been the same since. Of course, Bitcoin didn't stay alone for long. Starting around 2011, other cryptocurrencies like Litecoin and Namecoin began to emerge. Today, there are thousands of different cryptocurrencies, from giants like Ethereum, which introduced programmable smart contracts, to countless others. These currencies were a radical break from everything that came before, an attempt to build a global, borderless, censorship-resistant form of money. For a while, governments and central banks just watched the crypto explosion with a mix of confusion and concern. They liked the technology, but were nervous about the anonymity and lack of control. But they knew they couldn't ignore it forever. The game changed when governments decided to get in on the action. While Venezuela's 2018 attempt with the oil-backed Petro was widely seen as a failure due to a lack of transparency and trust, it was a signal. Major economies started exploring their own versions. China became the first major economy to pilot a digital currency, the digital yuan, ECNY. Now, central banks from Canada to the UK are all actively developing their own. These are called Central Bank Digital Currencies, or CBDCs. And it's important to know that a CBDC is not like Bitcoin. In many ways, it's the exact opposite. While Bitcoin is all about decentralization, a CBDC is a digital dollar, euro, or yuan issued and controlled directly by a country's central bank. The implications are massive. For us, it could mean faster, cheaper payments. For governments, it could offer a new level of economic control, allowing them to implement policy with surgical precision. But it also raises huge questions about privacy. In a world of CBDCs, every single transaction could potentially be tracked by the state. This sets up the next great battle for the soul of money, a contest between the decentralized, open ideal of crypto and the centralized, state-controlled model of CBDCs. The story of money is really the story of humanity trying to solve one problem. How do we trade with each other? We went from haggling over fish to trusting in a grain of barley. We learned to forge that trust into metal coins, and then to trust the paper promise of a banknote. We eventually untethered our currency from anything physical at all, placing our faith entirely in our institutions. And now we're watching money dissolve into pure digital code. From a cow to a coin, from paper to a string of data, the form of money has constantly changed. But its core purpose has always been the same. Money is the greatest shared story we've ever told ourselves. A fiction that allows millions of strangers to cooperate and build the modern world. Its form will keep changing. The only question is, what story will we decide to believe in next? If you want to understand more about the big ideas shaping our world, from economics to technology, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. We tackle questions like this every single week. Thanks for watching.